This is Pastor Matt, and we are reading on the Mortification of Sin by John Owen, and we are in chapter 5. This is the third part of chapter 5. I already read through 2/3 of it. We have a very small piece of this chapter left. We're dealing with the very end of thinking through mortification negatively. And I want to reread something I read last time. It says, mortifying a sin is not getting occasional victories over it. And then he said, there are two occasions or seasons. Okay, so two occasions or seasons. Let me get my pen here. Two occasions or seasons when a man who is wrestling with a sin may think he has mortified it. Okay. It happens when he has a regrettable outburst that rattles his complacency and terrorizes his conscience. And I believe I read through this one last time, but just in case I didn't, I'm going to reread this. It's actually been a few days since I read this. Happens when he has regrettable outbursts that rattles his complacency and terrorizes his conscience. It has a potential for scandal, and it obviously provokes God. This is a wake-up call. That's so interesting because I don't think of people in his day saying that. So I'm gonna have to look at the original because I don't know if this is a modernized excerpt from monergism or not. This is a wake-up call that shocks and startles him. It fills him with disgust for his sin and for himself. This sends him to God and makes him cry out as for his very life. It stimulates him to abhor his lust like hell itself, and so he sets himself against it. Now that the whole man, both spiritual and natural, has been awakened, sin pulls in its head, takes a low profile, and seems dead before him. It is like someone who sneaks into an army camp at night and kills an officer. Instantly, the guards awake, the men are roused, and a search begins for the enemy. In the meantime, the killer hides himself until the uproar is over, or he lies down like someone who is dead. Yet he is firmly resolved to do the same thing again as soon as he has an opportunity. When the Corinthians were accused of sin, they quickly mustered themselves to destroy it. It is the same way when a person's conscience has been pierced, perhaps by his lust and an outbreak of actual sin. Caring, indignation, desire, fear, revenge, all with axe in hand, are bent on working against the sin. And so, for a season, the lust is quiet. It has been run to the ground like a fox in a hunt. But when the hurry is over and the inquest is past, the thief appears again, alive and as busy as ever at his work. So very true. I think of quite often in my own life. This speaks to things that I've experienced, but there is a reality to that. Sometimes, especially if there's and he didn't say this explicitly, but if there's the fear of being caught or actually being caught in a sin, sometimes those things rile someone up. And I like his army camp illustration. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's been mortified just because of those things. And I think that many of us experience this when later everything dies down, we find that lust is still present. Number 2, it happens when he is convinced that he has mortified it in the crucible of some judgment, disaster, or pressing hardship. The heart is consumed with thoughts of how to flee from the present troubles, fears, and dangers of his sin. A person convicted in this way believes he can escape only by relinquishing his sin to gain peace with God. It is the anger of God that disturbs him. To be rid of God's anger, men resolve to put away their sin. They vow that sin will never again have a place in them. They will never serve it again. Accordingly, the sin is quiet. It does not stir. It seems to be mortified. It is not that it has received a wound. It is merely because the person's soul has regained its faculties. It asserts itself with thoughts that are inconsistent with the behavior of sin. Once such thoughts are laid aside, sin returns to its former life and vigor. Again, very similar to the last point. Just that thought of some dreadful thing has happened, and we're thinking that God is angry with us. So some tragedy has occurred, or some trial, or some difficulty has happened, and I'll never do this again. And But we find that when things die down, it's present again. Let's finish off chapter 5 now. In Psalms, the Israelites provide a good example of this frame of mind. Quote, despite all this, they continued to sin and did not believe his wondrous works. Therefore, God consumed their days in futility and their years in trouble. When he killed them, they sought him. Then they returned to him and inquired after him early. They remembered that God was their rock and the high God their redeemer. Nevertheless, they flattered him with their mouth, and they lied to him with their tongues. Their heart was not right with him, nor were they true to his covenant. I have no doubt that when they sought him and returned to him and inquired after God early, they fully intended to relinquish their sins. It is expressed in the word returned. To turn or to return to the Lord is done by relinquishing sin. They did this early with earnestness and diligence. And yet, despite all this, their sin was unmortified. Verses 36 and 37. This can be the state we are in after numerous defeats under trial. This can often lead to a great deception in the hearts of believers when sin remains. There are many other ways which people deceive themselves and assume they have mortified their lusts. They think they are invincible, and then they succumb again and again to sin, bringing upheaval and worry on themselves. And so ends chapter 5. Next time we get together, reading through the mortification of sin, we're going to deal with this here, mortification described in its particulars. I think this is looking at it in a positive light. What does it mean to mortify it? Okay, what does mortifying sin look like? Okay, and he gives 3 components, which we'll talk about next time. Mortifying a lust is 3 components: habitually weakening it, constantly fighting and contending against it, realizing success over it. I'm excited to look at those 3 things. Well, thank you for listening to this episode and to this reading of On the Mortification of Sin. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I can either answer those individually or in some future episode dealing with these questions. If there's a way to subscribe to my podcast and via the avenue that you're listening, I encourage you to do that. That way, as I come out with new ones, you can hear those things. Again, thank you for listening.